Howdy, and welcome to Chapter 13. In Chapter 12, we talked about compensation, and we talked about how there are three parts to total compensation. The first part being somebody's base pay, and the second part being incentives, and the third part being benefits. So last chapter we talked about base pay. Today we're going to talk about incentive pay, and then next will be benefits. So incentives are important in an organization because they affect workers' behavior. They cause motivation. And organizations can't compete unless their workforce is highly motivated. I found a survey done by SHRM, and it said that more than 50% of U.S. workers believe they could increase their productivity if they tried, but they have no motivation to do so. I find that really sad. I mean, what do you think? Are people that not motivated to do better? In HR and as employers, we need to find ways to motivate employees. So this chapter talks about how we can do that by using compensation. So we're going to talk about the connection between incentive pay and employee performance. How do organizations recognize individual performance and group performance and linking pay to performance? We're going to talk about different incentive programs for employees. So incentive pay or pay for performance is where we link pay to an employee's performance as either an individual, group, or organization. So it can be on the individual level, the group level, or the organization level. And we're going to talk about all three of those today because they're all important. They all should work together to incentivize people. So this is important because if we link it to performance, we will have certain behaviors or outcomes that we want to achieve. We'll have, hopefully employees will be motivated in the direction of the goals of the organization. Okay, so the goal of incentive programs, if we had to have one overarching goal, is to increase motivation. Okay, so that's the whole goal. And in order to do this, there has to be a connection, a connection between pay and performance. Because people have to perceive that what they're receiving or the incentives they're receiving is dependent upon performance. Those things are linked, and that's an important point about incentive plans. One theory behind this, it kind of explains it, is the expectancy theory model. And this has three parts. So the first part is expectancy or effort. So this part, we're talking about the perceived probability that efforts will lead to successful job performance. So will effort lead to high performance? Okay, so if I'm doing a job, I need to perceive that all I'm putting into it, all my effort, is actually going to lead to good performance. Okay. The second part is instrumentality. And instrumentality is the perceived probability that successful job performance will result in rewards. So in other words, will the performance lead to outcomes? So we have expectancy, where I think my performance is going to, my effort will lead to high performance. Then I have instrumentality. I believe that my performance will lead to outcomes or rewards. Okay, then lastly, an important part is valence. And valence means that the rewards that are available, that they're desirable. And this changes for everybody. Perhaps I'm very motivated by extra vacation time, and someone else is motivated by an additional benefit or maybe time off. Okay, so everyone's motivated by different things, but valence says that we have to consider that desirable. It has to be important to me. And we look at this as a mathematical formula. Okay, motivation is equal to expectancy times instrumentality times valence. And you can see what happens if one of those is 0. So if any of those is 0 because it's multiplication, then there'll be no motivation. And this theory makes a lot of sense to me as far as what really motivates people. So some individual incentive plans, there are many different ones. We'll talk about a few of them. One being piecework plans or piecework rates. And this is very simple. This just says that I'm going to pay somebody $1 for every customer order they enter. Okay, so if they order 40 customer orders, I pay them $40. Okay, so that's clearly linked to performance. And they're very popular. 35% of companies use some form of this. Okay, another form would be the standard hour plan. And it works sort of the same way, only you calculate a little differently. What this says is that every hour I expect someone to produce 2 items. Okay, so if you produce the 2 items in that hour, you get the base rate. If you produce 3, then you would get more based upon additional. Okay, so just kind of piecework, but just looking at it differently. Third is merit pay. We'll talk about that in a minute. Bonuses we'll talk about too. Individual bonuses. Okay, these are all individual type incentives, by the way. And lastly, sales commission. Okay, and we'll talk about each one of these. Okay. And when we talk about this, just keep in mind we're trying to link pay to performance and think of how well some of these do that. Merit pay is the annual increase that employees get based upon their performance through the year. So merit pay is determined by a couple different things. One is their performance evaluation. And we talked in chapter 10 about how we evaluate performance, and we evaluate people on a scale like 1 to 5, for instance, which this example shows. Okay, so we have the annual performance evaluation, and we also look at, secondly, their position in the salary range. Remember in the last chapter we talked about how companies put together salary ranges so that we know how much to pay people. So we look at these 2 things when we determine merit pay. Okay, so the first thing we need to do, of course, we have their performance rating. You can see this chart, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then we have to calculate their position in the salary range. Okay, and that's called a compa ratio, which just indicates where they are in the salary structure. So for example, let's say I have a position for an accountant. And the accountant, I've set up a minimum of $40,000. The midpoint is $50,000, and the maximum in the range is $60,000. Okay, just for simplification. Let's say I have an employee, Joe, who is at $44,000. So I want to calculate Joe's compa ratio. So to do that, I would look at how this compares to the midpoint. Okay, so 44,000 compared to the midpoint of 50,000 gives me, I believe, about 0.87. So Joe is below the midpoint. Okay, so let's say Joe got a 4 on his performance evaluation. I would simply go up to this chart, and Joe's compa ratio is 8.7, so that would be here. So Joe would get between 3 and 5%. And this is a general guideline. Okay, versus let's say I have Sue who's at $56,000. Okay, so Sue's compa ratio would be 56 divided by 50, or 1.12. And let's say that Sue is, let's say she got a 4 as well. So I'd go up to the chart for 4 and look for 1.12. So Sue would get between 2 and 4%. Okay, so just keep in mind, merit pay is based on their performance rating and where they fit in the salary structure. So those two things. Okay, incentive bonuses. This is also individual. And these are a great idea, okay, where we give them, they're like a one-time bonus for different things. So these are a good idea because they're not rolled into base pay. Okay, so that's good, because if you consider that people get merit increases, it increases their pay year after year. So by giving a one-time bonus, you're not kind of adding to that incrementally. Okay, the employee has to re-earn them each pay period. So they have to be re-earned. So that can be very motivating if they want the bonus. And sometimes it's just a one-time reward. They also are very good at linking to performance, because we can give these bonuses right after someone does something or that sort of thing. Two sort of really popular ones. One is the retention bonus. And retention bonuses are given to employees to incentivize them to stay with the organization. Okay, they're very popular. A lot of companies give hiring bonuses, where you get a bonus when you sign up to come into the company. Okay, commissions is another type of bonus. Okay, so commissions, it could be based on a percentage of sales. Okay. Watch the little clip from Christmas Vacation. It's, if you haven't seen the movie, it's an older movie, but it's pretty funny, and talks about the main character not getting his Christmas bonus and what happens. And I'll post the link in Canvas, but look at that, and I'd like you to think about these issues, and I'll post these questions too. But when you watch the video, think about the psychological contract we had talked about, and how is that violated by what happened to this character in the movie. Okay. Next we have group incentives. These are also, team incentives if you have work teams, because some of the individual incentives really discourage teamwork. They can be very competitive. So we also need to consider team type of bonuses. They can be based on increasing productivity or decreasing cost, are the two most popular. Most popular one's called gain sharing. And gain sharing is a plan where employees get some sort of a bonus or cash reward if they exceed some sort of goal set up by a team. Okay, so in other words, it's a group incentive program. It measures improvements in productivity, and then it gives some of that money back to employees. Okay, so in other words, I worked at a place once that had one of these for their manufacturing employees, and the employees got together in groups and they decided what could they do to make the process more efficient. So then changes were made to fix the process, and then the improvements were measured, and then a proportion of that then got the employees received. So it can be very motivating for an employer to help improve, the process or save money and that sort of thing. Okay. Then we have organization-wide incentives. This is for everybody in the organization. The two things normally that this is based upon, one is the profits of the organization, okay, and the other is the stock price. The stock price is just a measure of the worth of the organization overall. So profit sharing as a company-wide incentive rewards the group, the whole company really, rather than the individual. Okay, so we're rewarding the group. It's based on profits rather than gains, so it's whatever makes the company profitable. The employees get a percentage of that profit. Oftentimes it's put into a retirement plan for the employee, sometimes cash, but more often than not it's put in the form of some sort of a retirement plan. So the idea being that employees would then think like owners and how to save money, how to be more profitable. But it's very difficult sometimes to see how pay and performance are related when you're pretty far removed from impacting the profit of the organization. Okay. And profit can be influenced by a lot of factors, I mean, as we saw here recently. Okay. Then we have stock options. Okay, and this gives employees the right to buy a certain number of shares of stock at a certain price. Okay, and generally granted to executives, but a lot of companies are offering this to employees as well. So in other words, I could be granted an option for 100 shares of stock at $30 per share. So when the price goes above 30, I could buy those at 30 and have a pretty good deal. Employee Stock Ownership Plan, that's what ESOP stands for. This is where the company distributes shares of stock to the employees in a trust, and it makes the employees sort of like the owners of the company, because if you own stock in a company, you are technically the owner. So these are ways to give employees shares of stock so that they become owners of the company. Okay, that's it for this chapter. I hope you found some interesting things. And just remember that all these things seek to link pay to performance. That's the important thing. Thank you.